earlier on about trying to come up with a basis of analyzing the national picture without being dependent on polling per se. So what these are House races that were non-competitive. These have been selected. I think there are 361 House races that were not considered competitive by anybody, basically. These are all, gerrymandered districts and blowout districts that were not competitive. And so these are the Republican ones over here, and these are the Democratic ones over here. And this going left and right is just the margin of victory. These are Republican victories. These are Democratic victories. Some of them being, 100 to 0. We basically, in the updated graphs, we've discounted those. Anything where there was no opponent or where it was 100 to 0. But here are all the rest of them. And what is significant is the y-axis here. Now, the y-axis is the shift between the predicted margin for that race and the actual margin for that race. And these margins were predicted by 538.com, Nate Silver, and they were predicted in virtually all of these cases, because these were non-competitive races, without any polls being part of it, not on the basis of polling. They were predicted on the basis of prior results. They were predicted on the basis of candidate performance in past elections. They were predicted on the basis of advertising budgets, et cetera, but not polling. So nobody was asked, so you couldn't have shy Trump responders or shy Republican responders or anything like that. There's really no polling explanation for this. And what we saw is that in these solid Republican districts, these are obviously places where, they're mostly rural, ex-urban, a lot of heavy concentration of Republican voters and Trump voters. These predictions, there's a lot of noise, because again, these predictions are not based on polls. There's going to be a fair amount of variance, but they average out to accuracy, to basically spot on accuracy. There's no red shift, there's no blue shift. They basically got the predictions all right. Not only in terms of, by the way, for all of these races, the predicted winner won, all of them. So the predictions were accurate for all of these 361 races in terms of who the winner was. None of these races were flipped, and we don't expect any of these races, any of them, to have been targeted for any sort of manipulation. Why bother? You win by 60%, you win by 50%, you win by 40%. It's the same thing. There's no reward for the vast majority of these races in doing any rigging. So we think these races individually were left alone. So here's what you'd expect if predictions are based on sound big data, and this is what you get in the Republican areas. But in the Democratic areas, think Atlanta, think Philadelphia, think urban areas, high Democratic, San Francisco, the Peninsula, New York City. These are all high Democratic areas where there are a lot of Democratic votes. There's a 6% red shift, which is on aggregate a very, very large miss for these predictions. You can see how many of them are below the line of 0 of accuracy and how few are above the line. So the question becomes, what accounts for this? For those who are statistically minded, the t-test p-value on this is something like 10 to the minus 18. You talk about 100 million to 1. I mean, this is quadrillions. This just doesn't happen by chance. And there were no polls. So it doesn't happen because, and when I say no polls, there were extremely few polls. The vast majority of these races were not polled. So this didn't happen because Trump voters living in Democratic areas were shy or anything like that. No explanation, no benign explanation. Why did this happen? And our best guess at this point, up to this point, is that this happened because these races, although they were not targeted for manipulation, because there was no point in targeting these races for manipulation, but they were on ballots that were either targeted for manipulation or lost or suppressed. In other words, these races shared a ballot with the presidential race in some close states, with the Senate race in some close states, with state legislature races that might have been targeted. Not the House races themselves. They're all blowouts, but they were sitting on the same ballot. And that's what leads us at this point, and again, it's preliminary, to believe that what happened was there were whole ballots by the millions, probably about 5, 6, 7 million whole ballots that did not get counted. And so I'm going to have a convo with Greg Palast, because that's really his strength, his bailiwick. He's been doing that since literally before the Bush-Gore election. He's been doing it since the 90s, and looking at voter suppression. And one of the things that I'm going to ask him about that is exactly your question, is like, does this correlate? Has he seen a correlation with administrative control, either at the state level, Democratic, Republican Secretary of State, or at the county level? And whether he's seen enough to say that the suppression that he's seen for the 2020 election, he measured it for the 2016 election. I think he came up with a figure of around 7 million ballots, predominantly Democratic ballots, were not counted in 2016. And there's a variety of ways that happens. I mean, signature matching and being thrown onto provisional ballots because you don't have a voter ID that passes muster, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, he was pretty meticulous about how he came up with that number for 2016. And the belief is that the number is probably going to be even bigger in 2020. It would be enough to account for why Trump trailed in the exit polls and the pre-election polling aggregates by somewhere around 12 to 13 million votes, and wound up, losing by about 7 million votes. So 5 million, 6 million votes were shaved off of that Biden/Democratic advantage. But this, as arcane and funny as this graph looks, this may be, if not a smoking gun, it's a pretty strong indicator of what may have actually happened in 2020. And it suggests that it was whole ballots rather than individual races that were targeted. And whether they were targeted for late delivery or non-delivery or getting lost or not being counted or signatures not matching, whatever it might have been, getting kicked onto provisional ballots, which were then not counted, or some manipulation in the machines, which is obviously a lot harder to substantiate because it's really behind a curtain. There's nothing out in the open about it. Well, we don't know. But it does look like the real story of election 2020 was that down at the top, the unacceptable defeat margin for Trump was shaved almost in half. And then as you went down the ballot, expected Democratic victories, predicted control of the Senate, maybe 53 to 47, 54 to 46, gaining seats in the House, gaining state legislatures. None of that happened. Instead, it went the other way, and they happened to, get fortunate that Trump was being Trump, and they wound up with the thinnest possible Senate majority. But the basic story was that at the state legislative level, at the House level, at the Senate level, again, we saw one of these. If you'd taken the presidential race out of the picture, the story would have been, a shocking result in which the Republicans did, once again, far better than expected. And, so we know this. How actionable it is another story. The real battle now is over things like H.R. 1, the House bill, and then down at the state levels. The Republicans are already, they've done it in Georgia, they're in a template, they're doing it in all these other states, introducing bills that get rid of mail-in voting, that cut ballot boxes, drop boxes down. I mean, a whole slew of very open measures, very clearly designed to make sure that we do not have another, turnout tsunami like we had in both 2018 and 2020. And part of what drove that turnout, a huge part of what drove that turnout tsunami was Donald Trump. And it remains to be seen what kind of part Donald Trump plays and Trumpism in the 2022 and 2024 election. But the Republicans know that when that many voters turn out, even if they have some rigging capability, they're going to be hard put, and they're going to have to really, really fight like hell. The red thumbs and the blue tsunami. And they're trying to make sure that there are no more blue tsunamis, and they're really trying to cut down the franchise. That's really where the battle is going to be. I don't see great victories coming for electoral transparency. If we're very fortunate, HR 1 passes, and it passes in an amended form where truly hand-marked paper ballots are made available to all voters, whether they're early or mail-in voters or at-poll voters. The way the bill is written now, states are not obligated to provide hand-marked paper ballots for voters who actually come to the poll on election day. And of course, the states are the red states where the GOP has control, they're trying to make sure that basically all voters have to come to the polls on election day. They're cutting back on no excuse mail-in balloting. So in effect, if HR 1 passes in its current form, it's not going to do much. You're still going to get thrown onto BMDs in states like Georgia and Carolina and all these places. So we're working, trying to get that. Scrutineers.org. Scrutineers.org is doing a lot of work on trying to lobby on HR 1. I'm guessing that there are other groups, National Election Defense Council, NEDC maybe. I'm sure there's some lobbying going on. I'm sure Stacey Abrams is not sitting on her laurels. And so there will be a lot of pressure. It's going to be a hard political battle. It does not look like Rove and McConnell went to bat for Trump in this election, which is maybe one reason why Trump was so vehement, because he got the rug pulled out from under his feet. He thought he was guaranteed a victory and he didn't get it. And it's like he was really flaming, mad about it. Rove and McConnell are really interested in preserving the rule of the right wing, whether it's in the Republican Party or, whatever form it takes. And so, for McConnell, obviously in form of the Republican Party, where he has, so much power or had so much power. So, they're going to be really, really fighting, and way down at the state level, these people don't miss a trick. And they're already at it to try to really disenfranchise more voters of color, more of the Democratic constituency. And that's really where the battle's going to be. And it's going to be a very hard one.
Well, I mean, if they actually ended up doing most of the battle on whole ballots rather than targeting races, it seems like they did go to bat for Trump. They just couldn't overcome, the nationwide, or even on a state level, at the electoral level, how unpopular he was.
Yeah, I mean, my theory is that they might have gone to bat in a kind of look. I mean, they couldn't. McConnell and Rove really couldn't countenance a 13 or 15 million vote defeat for Trump. I mean, that would have just been such a smackdown. So there was certainly some incentive to mitigate the popular vote disaster. They knew he was going to lose. They could have manufactured, if they really went to bat with their corked bat, they could have, it looks like, manufactured an electoral college win for Trump. It was not that far out of I mean, it would have been a 7 million vote popular vote loss, but he would have, as in 2016, he could have won the electoral college. I mean, there are only a few 100,000 votes that were involved. I think that was absolutely within the realm of possibility. I do not think that the Republican establishment, which is what we believe conspiracy theorists that we are, has been, manipulating and working the thumbs on the scale for the last 20 years. I don't think, in my personal opinion, McConnell, he hates Trump personally. I mean, he hated him before this whole thing went down, and Trump cost him his Senate majority. So, I mean, you can hate squared at this point, or hate cubed. But he had no taste for Trump all along. And I think they felt they got everything they could out of him. They got the tax cuts and they got the courts, which is a huge, huge prize. And they needed him like a hole in the head. I mean, he made life incredibly difficult for these career politicians. I don't think they really wanted him to win. So they sure as hell weren't going to take any, big, massive risks for Donald Trump. They just needed to mitigate the popular vote loss. But it does look like they went to bat to preserve the party down at these down ballot levels through one means or another, through voter suppression or possible manipulation. We don't know. And are we ever really going to get proof of manipulation? It's possible. It's possible. There's possible ballots to be examined and FOIA requests and all that. It's not really in vogue right now, and nobody wants to look at that because the Trump people, in a way, ran interference for the electoral system by being so indiscriminate and truly, hair-raising about how they went about questioning the legitimacy of the election. I mean, we came within an ace of having literally, Congress people assaulted or killed or whatever. It really got hairy, and in people's minds, in the public's mind and the media mind at this point, that's all associated with, not accepting electoral outcomes. So the most important thing going forward from the standpoint of the powers that be is that we restore faith in our elections. And their idea of restoring faith is not bringing more transparency. It's shutting down anybody who questions the elections. I mean, we can see that already on Twitter and Facebook and Google. I mean, they've deplatformed people that, have questioned elections. They've taken down videos that even talk about elections like, the election of 2000 or the election of 1876, for that matter. At one point, it was like anything that questioned electoral legitimacy was considered to be, seditious. And that is, I got to say, I went through much of the month of December and much of the month of January flat on my back and really in pain, and with systemic effects and the medications effects, and it's something I really don't wish on anybody. But through that sort of haze, I was looking at this and saying, my God, from an election integrity standpoint, what an ironic, on the one hand, almost predictable, but just horrific outcome, because all our work in so many ways that we're really careful about. And you remember when we talked last time, I'm now remembering a little bit, I was very, very reluctant to go out there and get out ahead of any evidence or analysis I had. We learned our lesson. The few of us who went out, like Richard Charnon and stuff, and claimed that he knew exactly what happened and there was fraud. I mean, that didn't do us any favors. And there was a huge debate in the election integrity forces or community or whatever this time around between those who wanted to get on board with Trump and use his power and his momentum to really try to challenge the non-transparency of the electoral system. And those of us who said, no, you do not take a ride with this man. You do not go there. Look at where they're going. Look at what they're doing. And I wrote an email not very long ago to this group. Basically, it was long delayed. And I basically said, look, there's a distinction here. They had every right to go out and yammer to their heart's content and make the public case that this system is not transparent. That's what we've been doing. We've been basically saying, look, we have these numbers, whatever election it might have been, they're suggestive of the fact that, that we have results that are suspect. We can't prove anything. We really need a more transparent system going forward. That has been our argument. That would have been a perfect, I would have jumped on board with that if that was where they were going. If that was their argument, Team Trump, Lynn Wood, what's her name, Sidney Powell, if that was the argument they were making, look, we have suspicions and we can't get the evidence. And the reason we can't get the evidence is the system is too non-transparent, too closed. We need to change that. That would have been fine. What they were going out and saying was, we have the evidence, Trump won, it was a landslide. And that was a flat out lie. They didn't have the evidence. Every other indicator is that he lost, and he certainly didn't win in the landslide. So it poisoned it all. It really poisoned what is now the public perception of election forensics. You know, the public face of that is Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood. And, who got all this airtime, were people like myself and Steve Freeman and Ron Bayman and Bruce O'Dell and all the various people who at one time or another, put a lot of work into this and really tried to be careful about how we did our analysis. We didn't get any airtime. We were, basically talking to ourselves for the most part, even when I wrote a book, and all of a sudden they came from a different place with all the power of the presidency and Donald Trump's personality and the whole thing behind them. And they got all this airtime for basically a collection of lies and really, 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 cynical and disingenuous challenges to the system that eventually led to a riot and deaths and destruction. Unfortunately, we're in a position where we kind of have to bide our time, I guess, and try to reestablish some credibility for the kind of work we do. And in the meantime, the real battle, I think, is less with proving what happened in this election, as hard as that is for me to swallow, than it is in addressing the terms and conditions of the elections going forward, the next couple of elections, primaries and general, because that's really the only thing that's going to, that in any way we can change. Now, if some evidence from the past elections and this election can somehow be marshaled to help in that debate and help do what is needed to set back the cause of voter suppression and advance the cause of election transparency, then we're at their service. I'd be happy to provide that. But trying to sort of force it through the pipeline, I think is going to be, even more frustrating than it's been all these years. So we're in a tricky kind of place, and trying to weigh when we're doing harm and when we're doing good, and make sure we don't do more harm than good.
Well, I mean, I think Dems, do not talk about election security or election integrity. Despite passing laws like the SAFE Act or in the House, they give no airtime to this. And then they act surprised when Trump, which they knew two things going into 2020. They knew the election would be influenced by voter suppression, other tactics, and they knew Trump would claim it was rigged. And they made no preparation, did not discuss it, didn't make it a talking point, made no PR effort to address this, which was obvious years out. I mean, that's not a question.
I have no argument with that. I mean, we've
it wasn't. Well, it didn't just this fork of a huge Republicans outperforming polls on a astronomical level, while at the same time calling election fraud was you said it was ironic but predictable, was incredibly predictable, made strategic sense, something they've done for years and years and years. And Dems, being their hapless selves, whether selected for that or incentivized for that, just, act completely surprised. How could we have seen this coming? Who knew there was a train coming on these tracks?
I mean, I have no argument with that. We maybe there's a little Stockholm syndrome at play here, and I've just sort of given up. But, I mean, guys like Mark Elias and stuff, they're smart guys, representing the Democrats, and Biden at one time representing Clinton, from a legal standpoint. These guys are not dumb. For the most part, they didn't want to hear from us. We are, in many ways, up to a certain point, we're as threatening as Lin Wood and Sidney Powell, because we're basically saying, even somebody like Brad Blog is pretty mainstream these days, is basically saying, and Brad, if you're listening, I don't mean mainstream as an insult. I mean, you're not a loony. You make rational, really rational, well-constructed arguments is what I'm trying to say. But what we're basically saying is you can't really tell who's won an election if you can't observe the counting of the votes. And, that is, from the standpoint of the poobahs, that is really dangerous, because it does suggest that the legitimacy of the whole power establishment, to the extent that it's democratically elected and then appointed by supposedly democratically elected figures, is on quicksand. And so, whether it's Sidney Powell going out there and just pulling it out of some, hole someplace, or Lin Wood or Rudy Giuliani, waving his arms and, in a way, both our message is just as dangerous. And our message is, the way I would put it is, look, there's an enormous amount of evidence, up to and including the eye test and the fact that there were recounts and audits and whatnot, that, Donald Trump did not win this election. He certainly didn't win a landslide. He didn't win the election. If anything, votes were shaved the other way. But in a larger sense, we do have still a system that has no right to inspire confidence in losers of elections. It shouldn't inspire confidence in winners of elections, for that matter, either. But if you're a winner, you're fat and happy, and you just say yes and go on and govern. If you're a loser, up till now, losers, and we have urged Democratic losers in the past, the John Kerrys, the Hillary Clintons of the world, not to concede. We basically urged them to do exactly what Donald Trump did, minus the lying. We basically said, look, don't concede until we've given you a little forensic basis. We've given you a scout film of what's gone on, and maybe an indicator that there are some ballots that you should try to get a hold of, or you should try to impound these machines and look at the code, look at the memory cards. I mean, we've basically, would have supported an honest loser in 2020, whether it was Trump or anybody else, who was basically trying to do it the right way and say, look, we got a problem with transparency here. Let's look at this stuff. Not making outlandish claims, not bringing the Proud Boys in, not all that. But for the last 20 years, I mean, with one candidate after another, we basically said, oh my God, you're conceding on the basis of what? On the basis of a secret vote count. So, we were the ones that were constantly, for what it's worth, I was there in the Senate gallery, well, it's the House gallery, I believe it was the House gallery, in 2004. And there was a thing called the Boxer Rebellion. There's a play on words because there was a Boxer Rebellion in history. But it was Barbara Boxer, who was senator from California at the time, who joined some of the House, I believe it was part of the Black Caucus, in challenging the vote count from Ohio in 2004. And we were in that gallery. We had lobbied all day and worked pretty damn hard to get with Boxer's chief of staff and legislative assistant and stuff to get her to make that decision. It was a very, very close call. And she was risking a great deal by standing up at that point and creating all this trouble, because when she agreed, and you had a House member and a Senate member challenging the electoral votes from a state, Ohio, just like in the this month in January, the House had to break up. The joint session of Congress had to break up, and the Senate went to the senators. The senators went to the Senate, and the House members stayed in the House. And they had 2 hours to debate this. And where we were, I believe it was George Voinovich from Ohio was saying yada, yada, yada on the floor. And one of our colleagues or companions in the gallery shouted out, "Liar!" And she was gone within like 15 seconds. The security people had come down and just basically hoisted her out of her seat and walked her out, and everybody else, you could hear a pin drop. And we all wanted to scream liar. And we all wanted to scream about we didn't know at the time about Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we didn't necessarily know about, exactly what we thought the mechanism was, but boy, did it smell the way those votes turned around at the time. And we had a lot of strong evidence. And, we all wanted to scream, and we all wanted to, pick up cudgels and flagpoles and fire extinguishers and whatnot. We were mad. And this is the problem. I mean, Proud Boys and Boogaloo and all these, MAGA yahoos and stuff take it to a whole nother level. They're armed, they're violent, it's very dangerous and all that. But we were the losers in 2004. We thought we won. And we were, just torn between this desire to have our voice be heard and the decorum of the Congress. And in that time, in that age, in spite of the fact that Bush was a very divisive president in his own way, right? Iraq had happened and a lot of bad things. And, it was pretty partisan and pretty polarized, but we observed the decorum. We said, okay, we're taking this loss and we're not picking up weapons because there's something more fundamental involved here. And you just can't have a democracy where you pick up weapons when you lose. The problem is at this point, our elections have been in a way exposed as not really having a basis for winning the trust of either people like us back in 2004 that were willing to just sort of, one person shouted liar, everybody else was quiet. We were angry. We didn't like the fact that she was hauled out of there for basically telling the truth, which was that the guy was lying through his teeth. But we were quiet. And then in 2020, fast forward 16 years and Donald Trump and all that, and you have people really literally storming the Bastille. And there's not necessarily any guarantee at all that is going to change, or that's going to stop. So, when the belief is if we lose an election, it must be because it was rigged, your democracy doesn't have very long to live. And, that is kind of where we are. So for me, I'm torn between wanting to buttress the democracy by saying, hey, you can't do this. You've got to, at some point, stand down and accept these suspect results or results you consider suspect. And then the other part of me, which is a forensic analyst who keeps analyzing away and saying, well, whoa. If that means that we're going to have rigged elections ad infinitum and that rigging is not going to be, equal opportunity rigging because one party has the affiliations with, in this case, ES&S, it counts the lion's share of the votes.
Let's talk about that because a couple of things. One is there was a hit piece on you from Politico, and I responded to it, talking about the kind of make a false equivalency between the 2004 people who didn't, accept those results versus the 2020 Donald Trumpers. And I was like, 2004, W outperformed, his polls, Kerry underperformed. The data did not match the polls, the predictions. Whereas Trump, his loss was eminently predicted by everyone, including Fox News, and they were claiming that it was a travesty. So there was a difference between these results don't match anything that data suggests versus these results are exactly what the data suggested, must be
Doug, it's very possible that we could have counted every single vote by hand in public, observably, and the Trump people would have done the same thing. I mean, so maybe, some people, there's no convincing. I mean, they've just decided that God has given them, dominion not a bad pun, but God has given them, perpetual rule. And, if it turns out otherwise, it doesn't matter how many people observed it. It must be fraud. It must be fake. I mean, so some people, I mean, it is true. I mean, we've spawned, and Trump has spawned a real baby monster here. You can't have a democracy where that's the attitude. Either we win or we revolt. And they're very basically right there at this point. We win or we tear everything down.
What's that?
I don't think
What's that British, former, David Frum, who said, if conservatives realize they can't win in a democracy, they will not abandon conservatism; they will abandon democracy. And he
absolutely.
said that in 2018.
He's absolutely right. I mean, that's exactly what we've seen transpire. It's ugly, it's evil, it's anti-democratic. I mean, if you believe democracy is a good, then it's evil. I mean, nobody said you have to live under a democracy. Maybe we just should, resign ourselves to living under a dictatorship for a while because that's the cycles of history. I don't know. I'm still rooting for democracy. And, we are at a point where it is under siege because of that. And I personally don't think it would have gotten there if we had been counting ballots observably in public, hand-marked paper ballots, hand-counted, at least for the federal races, starting in 2000. Instead of putting in HAVA and having all these touch screens and everything, if we'd gone the other way, like countries like the Netherlands and Norway and Germany and whatnot, and really were counting New Zealand, Australia, blah, blah, blah. And if we'd been counting observably, I don't think this whole, well, for one thing, I don't think Donald Trump would have ever, gotten into office, but it would have, I think, altered not only our politics in terms of who was in the majority and who was in control, but it would also have, settled down this roiling and increasing sense that elections couldn't be trusted. We'd still have a problem because there'd still be guys like Trump, yelling about voter fraud and, making allegations they absolutely could not substantiate. You still might have that, but I just don't think it would have gained the kind of momentum that it had going into 2020 that made this so predictable. I mean, this was all gamed out, and we mostly, everybody except, as you said, the Democrats seemed to know it was coming. It is very frustrating. I mean, we've carried a lot of water for the Democrats, not in the sense of being partisan and, and carrying it because we wanted them to win. It's just that's the way the data and the patterns have been. And so we've wound up, making their case post-election over and over and over again with virtually no help from them. And, what can you do? I mean, it certainly hasn't driven me into the arms of Trump or anybody like that. I mean, I know the difference between, pathetic and evil. And, there are those who believe the Democrats, Steve Friedman is, one example, are kind of the Washington Generals to the Harlem Globetrotters, that they're sort of A team and B team, that they all have their assigned roles and the whole thing is, one sort of pretty big conspiracy. I don't go there. I don't think that's the way it works. I worked in Washington for a while. People have their own, parochial fiefdoms, and they have their own connections and whatnot, and they're behaving more or less rationally within what they can see and the way their minds, what they can wrap their minds around. It is hard, when I go to have a conversation with somebody at the adult table, just like I like to refer to, let's say, a pollster like Nate Silver, or somebody like Dean Baquet at the Times, or anybody, Eugene Robinson, these op-ed writers, somebody at the adult table, somebody who gets paid for basically sitting really close to the seat of power and either doing polling or doing campaign management or doing critiques, opinion pieces, that you realize just how much of a stretch it is for them to buy into this idea at all, that even 2004 was rigged, or that this has been, so full of mothholes. They just, they're not stupid people, God knows, and they're not evil people, and I don't think they're in on some grand conspiracy, with George Soros or, anybody like that. I just think that, they're in certain ways constrained by what they do every day. And what they do depends on the legitimacy of the system that they're working within. And it becomes very hard to entertain any suggestions that is built on any sort of electoral quicksand. So, I do get it. They're neither stupid nor evil nor conspiratorial or anything. It's just part of the way the system is set up for the most part. I mean, there may be a couple of exceptions to that, but for the most part, they're acting rationally from their perspective, from their relatively narrow perspective of what they see and what they do every day. And unfortunately, it plays out in this really, what has been this very ugly way that has led to, erosion of our democracy, of the basis of our democracy, and has put us in real danger. I've never been accused of being a cockeyed optimist. I don't see an easy way back from this, and I mourn on a regular basis, really a continual basis, that it has gone down this road, in spite of the fact that in many ways from years and years back, this is exactly where I saw it going. And I wrote a lot that basically said, look, if we don't watch out, this is where we're going to be. To actually be here is a real kick in the head. And, I don't give up hope easily. So I hope the Stacey Abramses of the world and various people can, do what they do best and take a good stand, make a good stand. In the end, good has a reasonable chance. Those who play by the rules and speak more or less the truth and honesty, there's a certain inherent advantage in being aligned with reality, as opposed to being aligned with, falsity and all these lies and fantasies. So maybe that will, throw its weight around a little bit, and we'll find our way back onto the balance beam.
I think the opposite.
All I can say.
If there was ever going to be reality causing accountability, 400,000 Americans dying of COVID because the government had no tolerance for reality and paying zero price at the polls. I mean, yes, lost the presidency, but like you said, 27 out of 27 toss-up elections went their way. What incentive do they have to accept reality or address reality?
Yeah, well, that's what I said. I mean, I'm not an optimist. I'm just, if you forced me, to come up with a basis for there being some hope, I take the very, very long view that, the Hitlers of the world and the Mussolinis and the Stalins and the Pinochets eventually run into some sort of accreting mass of truth and reality. Along the way, they can do unspeakable damage, and that we're beginning to see, and there may be a hell of a lot more damage. Look, I can't say I wake up in the morning and go do a dance and say, oh, it's a beautiful sunny day. I've been ill, injured. I've been depressed. I've been, at times burned out to the point where I don't even want to do this work. I resist it. I don't want to see another number as long as I live. It's been a heavy weight. It really has been a heavy weight. And as you say, anytime anything like that happens, that just, all this damage done, virtually zero accountability. It doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. Donald Trump had, negative coattails, or Biden had, if you want to look at it that way, Biden had negative coattails in an election like this. All these things that don't make sense and don't fit. And, my partner, she I always ask her, what's the Simon doctrine? And she says, the right always wins. And I say, yep. That's what I've gotten used to. And that's why I sort of said, maybe there's a bit of Stockholm syndrome operating with me, because it's all I've known for the 20 years that I've really been engaged in this is that no matter what you do, they seem to come out, you know, if not smelling like a rose, they come out with far more power and control than they should have based on the reality, based on the lies, based on what they're doing. I mean, you know, what has Donald Trump done for a single MAGA? You know, I mean, it's just more and more and more money to the tiny little 1/10 or 1/100th of 1%. You know, it just doesn't make it. None of this makes any sense. I mean, knocking out regulations that make it harder for, you know, you can't sue for injuries on the job. You know, my brain won't calculate it all because there's so much up there that has been done for bad, for outright for bad, against the interests of not just the public in general, but his own constituents.
But okay, so let me just ask, because you kind of touched on this. Let me ask, I guess, either two questions or one compound question. Is that the Republicans, you know, Giuliani, they had all this negativity about this lack of transparency in these voter machines, but it was only directed at Dominion and never ES&S. And the second half is, how is it different in the rest of the world? Because UK has a very similar right-leaning government that seems to come out ahead no matter what, how many mistakes they make. But you mentioned that the rest of the world counts by paper ballots. Does England also have electronic voting versus paper ballots? And then I guess, again, kind of like, why is it that Dominion gets the hate and ES&S is unmentioned?
Yeah, all right, let me take the second part first. It would be a great service if some, you know, bureaucratic backwater of the UN actually devoted itself to a detailed, ongoing, rolling, because these things are dynamic and they change, report and analysis of the voting systems of various countries. That should be centralized, just like they look at the, you know, the water purification systems of various countries or whatever. We should be looking at the voting systems. It's not as simple as the rest of the world votes by paper ballots. What it has really stood out to me is the countries that hand count the ballots. And the Netherlands and Norway joined that club. They got rid of their computers, as did Ireland. So you got the Netherlands, you got Norway, you've got Ireland, you have Germany, you have, to a large extent, Canada, you have New Zealand, you have Australia is a mixed bag. But these are countries that, if you look at them, they've hand counted these races in this era in which the prevailing sort of global trend has been right-wing populism. And every one of these nations has proven resistant to right-wing populism, every one of them. And so, you know, in some cases spectacularly, the Netherlands, the election of 2017, the right wing, they counted it by hand. The right wing populist who was, you know, on the rise, Wilders, got clobbered. And then you look at countries that, you know, do all this machine counting, countries like Hungary and Brazil. And, you know, what do you see? You see these right wing populists. Britain is somewhere in between. I'm not sure I fully understand the counting system in Britain. A lot of it is hand counting, but a lot of the transmission of results and votes takes place through a computer system. There is certain amount of evidence, well, a lot of evidence, dispositive evidence, that Russia was involved in the Brexit vote, and the extent of that involvement is what's not clear. Was it just influencing voters, or did it have to do with, you know, actually attacking vote counts or registration rolls? I don't know. I'm not an expert on that. But, you know, Britain has been somewhere in between, and there are computerized elements in Britain that you don't see in countries like the Netherlands and Norway. So maybe that accounts for it. We don't, you know, again, it would take a lot of expertise to be able to analyze the organic politics of Britain to see whether it's enough to account for these persistent right-wing victories and results. As far as Dominion and ES&S, and then I actually have to run. Half an hour, we're at about an hour 20. It is really important stuff and really absolutely fascinating. You're asking all the right questions. Maybe we can reconvene at some point, but I got to be out of here at 6:30. So Dominion and ES&S, I didn't realize, I was not aware at all about the pedigree of Dominion, and apparently, it's being associated with left-wing people. I don't know the truth of that, and I don't know. It would take some digging, and Jenny Cohn is probably somebody who could do it better than I could. She's been very good about looking into these companies. Whoops, did we lose you?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, we're back. I just, for some reason, my computer started throwing up AOL. There are people better situated than I, although these companies are pretty opaque. But yes, very clearly the Republicans, Team Trump, not the Republicans, but Team Trump, targeted Dominion. And obviously, given the breakdown of how votes are counted in this country, Dominion and ES&S account for somewhere between 70 and 80% of the vote count, maybe even more than 80% now, but it's in that range. And Dominion is kind of the junior partner. ES&S counts most of them. And I think that, clearly if you knock Dominion out, ES&S becomes the beneficiary. And ES&S clearly has right-wing roots. I mean, the Yarosevich brothers, and just, you can go Jeffrey Dean, you can go through the pedigree and the history of ES&S. It's been affiliated with the right. This evidence that they are all head up about the secrecy of the machines and literally never said a word, with all that airtime and all these law cases and everything, not a word about ES&S. That tells you a hell of a lot about what, their view of ES&S is our friend. We don't attack them. We want to enable ES&S to count even more of the votes. And of course, you have to ask yourself, what is that all about? Because it's just as secret as Dominion, if not more so. Now you have Dominion firing back. And, I would never in a million years have ever thought that I would find myself siding with Dominion in a lawsuit, defamation lawsuit or anything. And I'm sure a lot of my election integrity colleagues cannot bring themselves to that. And they think ES&S is, Dominion and ES&S are just both evil, and that's the end of that. But in this particular case, from a business standpoint, you're running a business, you're in an extremely competitive business with one competitor, primary competitor, and you're getting attacked, calumniated, falsely attacked with no evidence by these Trump, foot soldiers and lieutenants, and your public reputation is getting really, really damaged. Everybody now knows Dominion, question mark. ES&S hasn't even been mentioned. They have every basis in the world for, whether you like computerized voting or not. In my mind, they have every basis in the world for filing these defamation suits. That having been said, it could have a very negative result. You could have a result that we never look into, these vote counts again, because everybody's scared to say boo. It cuts both ways. But clearly from the Team Trump standpoint, that was, absurdly targeted. If you're actually looking for election integrity, then what they did makes absolutely no sense. If you're looking for future political advantage or current political advantage, or to make a big populist cause, then it makes perfect sense what they did. And it's back. It looks like it may be backfiring on them. It remains to be seen. But again, you know, I would never get in a car with those people. You know, I don't care how tired my feet were. I don't care how far I had to walk. I don't care how much I was carrying on my back. If they stopped and offered me a ride, I'd tell them to just get lost. And I'd just keep walking.
Well, it's 6:30. It's you got to go. So thank you for your time. I will upload this on YouTube. Yeah. So I'll send you a link when it's up.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you so much. It's been really good. And, you know, I have to confess, I approach a lot of these interviews at this point. It's been 20 years. And sometimes I just, you know, feel like, you know, what is there to even say? And in this case, you know, whatever you asked and whatever, I got to some things that are pretty, you know, passionate for me, pretty core things. So I really appreciate the questions and the time. And, you know, we can come back to it if you feel like there's any, you know, things that we've left undone or new developments or whatever. Absolutely. Anytime, just let me know.
All right. Well, thank you. I will take you up on that. All right. Have a
Okay.
good one.
You too, Doug. Be well.
Bye.
Bye.